So, in this class, we're going to be talking about how to summarize the story or how to express it concisely and simply in conversation. Now, one of the difficulties in teaching how to summarize Yu Zhi Le is that the original story, as told in the Zhuangzi, is already very short and simple, just a few lines, in fact. So if we want to share this story with our foreign friends, we probably actually need to expand on the story. 扩展故事. And we need to expand a little bit so that our foreign friends have enough background information, but also so that they have enough of an understanding of what the point of the story is. So, when introducing this story, it's probably important to explain a little bit about who Zhuangzi is and what his school of philosophy, Taoism or Taoism, is all about. 就是说，他的道教哲学教育究竟是什么? So, how might we do that? Well, when it comes to Zhuangzi, it's probably worth first just giving a few of the basic details of when he lived so that our foreign friend has an idea of what era, what age we're talking about. So, we might start off by saying something like this. Let me tell you a short anecdote about one of our very ancient philosophers, Zhuangzi, who lived more than 2,300 years ago. I'll just mention here that anecdote is a pretty good word to use to describe this story. An anecdote has the connotation, 就是它内涵为 a description of a short incident. 就是一个很短的事件的一个描述 rather than a proper story with a plot, 就是一个适当的故事和情节. Okay, let's go on now to describe what kind of thinker Zhuangzi was. Well, as I mentioned, he was a Taoist or a Taoist. Now, how on earth are we going to describe Taoism to our foreign friend? 我们到底如何该解释道教给一个或者道家给一个外国人 ？OK， 特别是我们如何要用英语去解释这个哲学思想。People might disagree with any definition you give. But let's give a definition, though, that helps to give a frame, 就是给出一个框架 to the story of Yu Zhi Le, the story of Zhuangzi and the fish. So I'm going to try and define Taoism in this way. Taoism or Taoism is a school of thought that believes in the importance of emotions over logic and rationality. It believes in engaging directly through your feelings rather than trying to analyze nature. Okay, so perhaps all of this is a little bit complicated. So I've mentioned some contrasts here. Let's take a quick look at some of them. Okay, so on the one hand, I've talked about the emotions, 感情, and on the other hand, I've talked about logic and rationality, 逻辑和理性. I've talked about engaging directly, 直接连接. I've also talked about analysing, 分析. So what do we mean by engaging directly? Well, engaging here means connecting. So engaging directly means connecting with something without anything getting in between, okay? So engaging directly with nature then means being able to experience nature without letting anything get between you and nature. But what sort of thing did Taoists think might get between us and nature? Well, too much analysing, for one. So what exactly do we mean by analysing? Well, it means, basically, if we take it from the ancient Greek, it means cutting things up and thinking about things in too logical and too dispassionate a way. So, engaging directly 是什么意思呢? Engaging 意思是连接，所以 engaging directly 意味着连接某样东西是没有任何障碍，直接与自然连接意味着你在感受自然的时候没有任何障碍。 但是道学家认为什么是障碍呢？那就是过多的分析。指的是什么呢？指的是把事情切割，思考事情过于服从逻辑，太过冷酷。Okay, that's enough for our very brief introduction to Taoism or Taoism. Now we can proceed with the story. And I think the story can actually be summed up pretty easily. So let's try. So one day, Zhuangzi was with a friend called Huizi. The two of them were on a bridge looking at fish. Zhuangzi said, "The fish are so happy." Huizi replied, "How do you know they are happy? You're not a fish." Zhuangzi replied, "How do you know I don't know? You are not me." So then we'll probably need to explain a little bit about what the meaning behind this story is. But remember, we still have to be brief. So let's try to categorize what the views of each man represents. Huizi, we can say, represents skepticism. Okay, so let's hang on for a moment and give a definition to that word. Skepticism means finding reasons to doubt whether something is true. 也就是说，找到理由怀疑某些事的真实性。So, let's have our next sentence. Huizi represents skepticism. He doubts whether Zhuangzi can really know what the fish are feeling. Zhuangzi represents Taoism or Taoism. He believes that feelings can give you knowledge, true knowledge. And now, before we go on to the next sentence, I just need to introduce one more important word: refute. Refute means using an argument to show that a previous statement cannot be proven. 就是说，用一个论据来表示之前的陈述无法成立。Zhuangzi then refutes Huizi's skepticism by using Huizi's own logic. Then finally we can add, Zhuangzi uses logic against Huizi to try to defend his idea that we can connect to nature directly with our own feelings. Okay, so let's put it all together. Let me tell you a short anecdote about one of our very ancient philosophers, Zhuangzi, who lived more than 2,300 years ago. Taoism or Taoism is a school of thought that believes in the importance of emotions over logic and rationality. It believes in engaging directly through your feelings rather than trying to analyze nature. So one day, Zhuangzi was with a friend called Huizi. The two of them were on a bridge looking at fish. Zhuangzi said, "The fish are so happy." Huizi replied, "How do you know they are happy? You're not a fish." Zhuangzi replied, "How do you know I don't know? You are not me." Huizi represents skepticism. He doubts whether Zhuangzi can really know what the fish are feeling. Zhuangzi represents Taoism or Taoism. He believes that feelings can give you true knowledge. Zhuangzi then refutes Huizi's skepticism by using Huizi's own logic. Zhuangzi uses logic against Huizi to try to defend his idea that we can connect to nature directly with our own feelings. Okay, so that's the summary of the story. Now, I suggest that you don't try to memorize this summary, but rather try to learn its content and practice telling it in your own words. Let's now think about the kinds of questions a foreign friend might ask you or that might come up in a conversation so that you might be able to use this story to help you answer. Let's take an example. Imagine your foreign friend said to you, "So, can you tell me a little bit more about Zhuangzi? What was his thinking really all about?" Well, you might answer like this. "Well, I am no expert, but Zhuangzi believed that we humans are able to engage closely with nature and attune our feelings to nature. Let me tell you a little story to explain this. And then you can bring up the story that we've just discussed. Or what if a foreign friend says this to you? You know, you can never really know what someone is thinking or feeling just by looking at their expression. What really goes on in someone else's mind is always a mystery. Well, you might reply like this. Maybe you're right. One of our ancient philosophers, Zhuangzi, thought like that. In fact, there's an interesting story about him and another of our famous philosophers, Zhuangzi. And then you can bring up the story. So what I really want you to achieve in this class is to learn the content of this story well, learn all that relevant vocabulary, learn a few of these phrases like skepticism, or words like rationality, logic, words like refute. Because what we really want to do with this story is to show to our foreign friends how ancient philosophers in China, philosophers who lived more than 2,000 years ago, were able to use reasonable and rational argument to discuss some of the most deep and profound and most difficult philosophical questions. As I've said before, skepticism is an idea that has come up frequently in Western philosophy, but it didn't get very clear expression until some 1,800 years after Zhuangzi, with a very famous French philosopher called Descartes, who also wondered not only whether we could know what was going on in the minds of other people, but even went so far as to wonder whether we could even be sure that there is anything that exists outside of our own mind. But in the centuries since Descartes, many Western philosophers have used the kind of logic that Zhuangzi used to refute Zhuangzi, to refute Descartes' own skepticism. They have tried to question whether being skeptical in that way is even possible or logically coherent. So what the Zhuangzi story tells us is not just the beauty and the interest of Chinese philosophy, but also how Chinese philosophy, very cleverly through anecdotes, is able to touch on some very deep and profound philosophical questions. Okay, well that's about all for today's class. I look forward to seeing you in the next story. Bye for now.